setting new standards in podcast excellence. You have joined the WBT, fully focused on business and taxes. Here is your host, Michael Lodge.
And this is Michael Lodge, and I'm glad that you've come to join me again, and we're going to talk about something that Congressman Ryan is out really selling at the moment, but I don't think he's getting very far because he really hasn't sold it to Congress. And Congress is split in three different ways on the GOP side, in one direction on the liberal Democratic side. And there's no meeting in the middle to get anything done. So what do we have? We have basically all talk, and there's not going to be anything done. There needs to be real reform in this country on taxes because it is a burden upon the American people. And the way that it happens is every time that you take a deduction on your tax return, you are opening yourself up for a tax audit. Every deduction is subject to a tax audit. So when you get that nice little letter from the IRS for you taking charitable deductions and they want you to show proof, that's an audit. And you open yourself up to be audited for more items because the IRS can do that. So it's worthless. So real tax reform really means that there needs to be done away with all deductions. Your mortgage insurance deduction, charitable deductions, your 2106 deductions for business expense, it needs to be thrown away. Then we need to look at the income levels of individuals, of American taxpayers, and say, okay, this range gets this percentage, another range gets this percentage, etc., and go on from there. But it has to be fair, and it has to be revenue driven so that we're not losing any revenue into the U.S. government. But on the same side, when you have tax cuts and you have deductions being thrown away with, you have a whole new tax system that really eliminates a lot of the work that the IRS does right now. The IRS basically becomes just a tax collection firm. That's all that they become. And there should be no issues of criminology. There should be no issues of the IRS needing to have a fully armed force, police force behind them, which they do, and they're out there training every single day on weapons. Come on. So we need real tax reform because right now the tax system puts Americans at risk. And being at risk opens up huge tax liabilities for Americans. We should no longer be afraid of getting a letter from the IRS. Because right now, when we get that letter and we see IRS on it, people panic. I know, I get the calls into my office every single week and day. So we need to stop this because true tax reform means that we eliminate the majority of the IRS and we eliminate most of the tax code by getting rid of all of those deductions. You know how many pages of tax code comes with every single deduction because there's rule upon rule upon rule and exemption and this and that, and it goes in a whole bunch of different directions. It's so complicated for the American public. It needs to be done away with. So if you think that Congress is going to be able to do pure tax reform, it's not going to happen. Because you've got too many people who are tied to those deductions through a lobbying group or a special interest group that donates very heavily to their campaigns. And this is where we get into trouble, where nothing can get done. Listen, I believe President Trump when he says, yes, he wants tax reform. I believe him when he says that. But I don't believe it when Congressman Ryan says it because he knows that each one of his members is tied to some special lobbyist group that's tied to one of those deductions on your forms. Now, if we did away with all of those deductions, you know how many lobbyists would no longer have a job in Washington, D.C.? A lot. Which would be a good thing. That's a positive to this whole thing. If we did real tax reform. But when you've got so many hands in the cookie jar, as my mom used to say it, when we've got so many hands in the cookie jar, nothing can ever get done without a political fight. Now, if everybody would come together and say, okay, let's make it as simplified as possible without losing revenue, then everybody could get something done. They could come to a middle ground and get it done. But let me tell you, the Democrats do not want tax reform. Listen, in Obamacare, there were 21 taxes added into that tax form, that healthcare bill that no one even knew about until it became too late, and they had to go to court. And then the court said, "Yeah, those are taxes." 21 taxes, and all of those taxes are generating Democratic money for their causes. Why a health care bill would ever have tax law written into it is really stupid. And those people who force it upon us, Pelosi and all the other people who pushed this bill on us and said, oh, we got to read it to see what's inside it. Well, we read it and we found out there were taxes tied to ACA. So that's why I've been saying all along that ACA needs to be repealed, and then you've got those 21 taxes taken out of the way, and you've got ACA done with, and then you can move on to tax reform. Unfortunately, neither one will be done because Congress has failed America because they are so divided. And there's just too much hands in the cookie jar. In fact, there's so many hands in the cookie jar that everyone's in there and they're stuck. The only way you can do it is by breaking the cookie jar and getting all the hands out of there. That's the only way that you can do it. So we have this hope in America that there's going to be tax reform, but in our minds we have to tell us, it's not going to be done because Congress can't do anything. We have a Congress that is moot at the moment. They're stuck in mud. They're stuck in a swamp, and they can't get out of it because their hands are tied to money. And it's tied to power. So listen, Congressman Ryan can go out there and he can say all these things he wants to about reforming tax, but it's not going to happen because Congress is too divided within itself. Sad to say, but it's the truth. Washington, D.C. evolves around money. And it evolves around how much money they're going to make for their next campaign and how much are they going to be able to keep out of it, what book deal they're going to make, etc., etc., etc. And it's all tied to the tax code. It's all tied to every deduction that's on your tax return. Mortgage interest. So who do you think's involved in that? You bet bankers, mortgage bankers associations, mortgage companies, etc. The list goes on. Business expenses. Employee business expenses. Yeah, all of the companies that support CPE credit for nurses, etc., that's no longer going to be deductible, or should not be deductible, I should say, under tax reform. So you have all of these industries tied to a specific deduction, and they're going to fight to keep it because if it's tax deductible, they believe that you'll spend money on it so that you can deduct it. So you see the turmoil that we're in. We're in a corrupt tax system with a corrupt government, with corrupt congressmen, all tied to lobbyist money. And all that lobbyist money is tied to the deduction that you're taking on your tax return. Come on, let's just call it as it is. Let's be truthful about it. So Paul Ryan is talking about tax reform, but really what I think he's talking about is just tax deductions. We have got to change the tax system so that Americans are safer when it comes to taxes and the criminology of taxes and everything else. We've got to change the system so that congressmen are no longer tied to tax deductions. So we need to change. But will it change? Gosh, you know what, the deepest portion of my heart, I really hope it can change. But really, will it change is the question. And that is the question that we should be asking every single one of our members of Congress and the Senate. Because they can't get anything done unless they come to a realization that they need real tax reform. I mean, real tax reforms, where you get in there and gut it out, but still being able to focus on generating revenue for the government. So I just want you to realize that tax reform is a wish. And it's what we all want, right? We all want our taxes to reduce. We all want tax reporting to be simplified. And we all want taxes not to be a criminal act or turn into a criminal act. Remember, every single time that you sign your tax return, you are signing it under penalty of perjury that what you're telling the IRS and the U.S. government and Department of Justice that it is true and correct. If it isn't, then you're subject to a criminality charge. So I just want you to think about it, okay? Because it is a situation that Americans can get into trouble very quickly. If we do not simplify the tax reporting, and if we do not fairly spread the percentage of tax due across the American people evenly and fairly, then we're really not going to have tax reform. We're just going to have talking about tax reform. Just like they talked for 7 years about repealing Obamacare. Well, now we're into the talking phase of real tax reform. Will it happen? I don't think so. In my gut, I feel that it just will not happen. They may pass something that they say is tax reform, but it really won't be tax reform. It'll just be a Band-Aid. So think about it over the next few days, but if you really want tax reform, you need to contact your congressman and your senator and say, we need real tax reform. We don't need promises. We don't want to hear about promises of doing tax reform. We want it to get done. We want it to happen. I don't want any more town meetings telling me that you're going to do it. I want you to actually go to Washington and actually do it. That's what we're asking for as American people. Anyway, so my ending here is tax reform. No, I highly doubt it. But let's pray it does happen. This is Mike Lodge. I'll talk with you soon.
This is brought to you by Lodge & Co., a business and tax advisory firm where your success is our goal. Call us today toll-free at 888-681-1518 or visit us at www.lodge-co.com and learn more about what we can do for you. Lodge & Co., your source for sound business and tax services.
Thank you for listening to the WBT with Michael Lodge. Join us again tomorrow as we explore more about business and taxes. Follow us on iHeartRadio and go to our podcast website at www.wbtpod.com and listen